And with the pouring rain accompanied by the violins of an exquisite Miklos Rocha's composed score, this is Alan K. Rohde providing commentary for one of the most significant post-World War II films noir, The Strange Love of Martha Ivers. With the one and only Barbara Stanwyck, the great Van Heflin, and the then newcomer Lizabeth Scott above the title, this Hal Wallis production under the auspices of Paramount Pictures was also the film debut of the legendary star Kirk Douglas, whose introduction to the film I shot back in 2010 and is a companion feature on this disc. At just under 2 hours, this is a considerably longer picture in comparison to many others of its era and style, but there is much to talk about, so I believe the time will move as fast as the falling raindrops. And how noir is it to begin a film with a flashback to 1928? Miklos Rocha, the great Hungarian composer who won the Academy Award for Alfred Hitchcock's Spellbound the previous year, remarked in his memoir, A Double Life, the book title referring to the professional division between Rocha's concert music and film compositions, that by the time of Martha Ivers, he was finally being left more or less alone to compose film music by the Paramount Music department head Lewis Milestone. Rocha was too much of a gentleman to name Milestone in his book, but related how the music head told him his score for Double Indemnity was more appropriate for the Battle of Russia, and that he, Rocha, didn't understand how to properly compose music for film. Can you imagine that? At the Double Indemnity premiere, Paramount production chief Buddy DeSilva walked up to Milestone and Rocha and personally praised the score. Milestone put his arm around DeSilva, saying, "I always find the right guy for the job, Buddy, don't I?" As Rocha discovered, this was so often how Hollywood worked. By the late 1940s, he wrote his score for The Killers, which followed Martha Ivers, and inaugurated what he designated as the third period in his film scoring career. The first he dubbed as Oriental, in which the films had exotic locations: The Four Feathers, The Thief of Baghdad, The Jungle Book, Sahara, Sundown. The second he called Psychological, Spellbound, The Lost Weekend, Secret Beyond the Door, The Strange Love of Martha Ivers, and The Red House. The third was what he termed hard-hitting film noirs dealing with American urban life, The Killers, followed by Brute Force and The Naked City. But as we'll see, Martha Ivers is as strong a noir as any of them. This portion of the film was shot at the old Southern Pacific Railway yard in downtown Los Angeles. Daryl Hickman and Janice Willis are the Martha Ivers and Sam Masterson characters that will be played by Stanwyck and Heflin. 15 years ago, I introduced Martha Ivers at the Egyptian Theater in Hollywood with Daryl Hickman as the guest. What was really special was being able to chat with him in the green room during the first feature and take in the depth and breadth of his extensive career. From The Grapes of Wrath to the human comedy, Leave Her to Heaven, The Setup, and then through his other careers as a successful television executive and an acting coach. He actually wrote an extraordinary book on teaching acting and acting. Hickman's an extraordinary artist, and I'm happy to note at the age of 90, Daryl is still very much with us. Van Heflin actually gave makeup artist Wally Westmore a snapshot of himself as a boy in order to design Hickman's makeup and to resemble him as closely as possible. This scene has Janice Wilson being returned home by the police to her evil aunt, played with quiet sadism by Australian actress Judith Anderson. Even though her part is brief, Anderson doubles down on her earlier portrayal of the demented Mrs. Danvers in Rebecca. The Martha Ivers press book quotes Anderson, "This is the meanest part I've ever done. I'm really sinking low." And here's the unctuous, ass-kissing Roman Bonin, accompanied by Mickey Kuhn, who's playing the Kirk Douglas role as a kid. Kuhn, to my knowledge, is also still with us. He's the last surviving credited cast member from 1939's Gone with the Wind. And the boy is already being taught by his dad to be a tattletale. Roman Bud Bonin was one of the early members of the group theater, close friends with another great character player, Art Smith. Coming to Hollywood, Bonin was one of the founders of the Actors Lab and was a principal target of the right-wing witch hunters beginning in the late 1940s. Bonin and others in the lab were summoned before a California Senate committee and refused to answer questions if they were or had been communists. For Bud Bonin, the strain of keeping the Actors Lab going, being a single parent, and also being persecuted politically resulted in his death on stage from a heart attack during an Actors Lab production in 1949. He literally collapsed as the final curtain rang down. The working title of the film was from Jack Patrick's original story, Love Lies Bleeding. There are a few better noir-stained film titles, but Hal Wallis decided to change the title for commercial reasons. Robert Rossen's Martha Ivers script put forth some very strong content for 1946, and a number of compromises were forced onto the picture by Motion Pictures Producers and Distributors of America censor Joseph I. Breen. In my opinion, Wallis was one of Hollywood's greatest film producers, but above all else, he was a pragmatic man whose pictures always made money. He rarely acted against a film's potential commercial interest over a censorship issue that he thought he couldn't win.
You'd better, miss. You know how she feels about that cat. I'll bring it up to your room.
The butler taking the cat from Janice Wilson is the actor Thomas Loudon. A singular Wallis exception to censorship issues occurred in 1938 at Warner Brothers when he went forward with Dr. Ehrlich's Magic Bullet, starring Edward G. Robinson as the Jewish scientist who found a cure for syphilis. This was right after Hitler said publicly that any scientific discovery by a Jew was worthless. For Martha Ivers, Wallis bought Patrick's original story for $15,000, a decent chunk of cash in 1946, and had Robert Rossen write the script. Judith Anderson is just so hateful in this scene.
Look at me. You don't seem very sorry.
I am. I'm sorry I was caught.
You can see in Janice Wilson's expression the beginnings of the Martha character that will be brought out fully by Barbara Stanwyck.
Each time you were brought back here, no matter how far you got, you were brought back here.
You don't own the whole world.
Robert Rossen and Hal Wallis had a close and fruitful association dating back to the 1930s when they were both at Warner Brothers with films like Mark Woman, Dust Be My Destiny, The Roaring Twenties, The Sea Wolf, etc. Wallis left Warner Brothers in 1944 after his ego and that of Jack L. Warner could no longer coexist. A famous true story has Warner running up at the 1944 Academy Awards to accept Wallis's Best Picture Oscar for Casablanca, a film Warner had little to nothing to do with as it was Wallis's picture. But as Jack L. so often pointed out, it was his surname on the studio's water tower, so Wallis moved on and set up shop as an independent producer at Paramount in partnership with another disaffected Warner executive named Joseph Hazen. He used a number of his former Warner associates who had talent. Wallis was an astute judge of talent, and these folks included director William Dieterle and Rossen, who in addition to Ivers would write another pair of Wallis films at Paramount, Desert Fury and The Accused. As Wilson is sent to her room, Bonin hangs out to try and score points for his scheme to have Anderson send his son to college and support him. Bonin really excelled at playing these invertebrate type of characters, the weak, cowardly warden in Brute Force, Dana Andrews' failed father who lives by a railway yard in The Best Years of Our Lives, and Ida Lupino's broken down dad at the beginning of The Hard Way. As Wilson and Kuhn meet up to discuss what happened, Hal Wallis meticulously planned Martha Ivers as he did all of his films. After paying Rossen $38,700 for a treatment and a finished script, he brought in Stanwyck for $100,000 for 4 and 5/6 weeks, borrowed Van Heflin from MGM for $60,000, and paid new discovery Kirk Douglas $15,000. Lizabeth Scott, whom he had under personal contract and was appearing in her second film, was paid a mere $7,500. All up, the picture was budgeted at just under $1 million. Director Lewis Milestone also received $100,000 at the rate of $5,000 per week for 20 weeks of work. Because of the World War II wage and price stabilization laws still in effect when pre-production began in June 1945, remember the war with Japan didn't end until September 2nd, 1945, Milestone had to write a long justification for his salary to the government by citing his previous salary from Fox with the Purple Heart and explaining why he was only paid $59,000 for Edge of Darkness at Warner Brothers in October 1942. Although Hal Wallace was a producer in the truest sense of the word, he knew editing, story, casting, film budgeting, inside and out, since rising from a downtown theater manager for Warner Brothers. Then he became the publicity maven who took care of Rin Tin Tin and succeeded Darryl F. Zanuck as Warner Brothers production chief in 1933. The key creative partnership for Martha Ivers was Robert Rossen and Lewis Milestone. Darryl Hickman enters to say his goodbyes. He's wisely getting out of town. Iverstown was designed by Rossen to be a typical factory town set in West Pennsylvania. Rossen and Milestone shared both a common Jewish heritage and a similar political outlook. Rossen was the son of a rabbi from New York's Lower East Side. He was a member of the Communist Party USA, or CPUSA. Rossen believed the party was dedicated to social causes that, quote, we poor Jews from New York were interested in, unquote. Named as a communist to the House of Un-American Activities Committee in 1947, Rossen was subpoenaed to testify to UAC in 1951 and took the Fifth Amendment, refusing to answer the committee's questions. He quickly found himself blacklisted and had his passport revoked. Called again in 1953, Rossen, by this time distraught by his inability to work, and this was after he became an accomplished director with his film All the King's Men winning the Oscar for Best Picture in 1949, a desperate Rossen became an informer. He named 57 friends and colleagues as communists and so was able to work again, but would be regarded as a pariah in many circles, another needless casualty of the blacklist period. Wilson is a young Stanwyck who wants to go with Hickman, who just made a nice slide down the banister. This sequence that follows with Judith Anderson is both chilling and satisfying. I can watch a million movie murders and not flinch, but anything directed toward animals and children elicits a visceral emotional reaction. I think that's true of a lot of people. As Anderson put it, the script calls for me to be cruel to animals and children. It's bound to be a pleasure to audiences when I die my violent death. Oh, they'll love that moment. Miss Anderson was precisely correct on all counts. Never has a movie death been more richly deserved. She definitely needed to die. All that close-up of the stick being welded and she being hit caused a lot of censorship problems that I'll discuss later. Roman Bonin appears and the cover-up begins. Lewis Milestone was not a party member. He was simply a robust liberal. But later on, Hedda Hopper and others got after him in the 1950s, and he actually had to leave the country for a time. He was born as Lewis Milestone in the port city of Odessa in what is now Ukraine and raised in the province of Bessarabia, now Moldova. He grew up witnessing pogroms against Jewish citizens in his hometown of Kishinev. These pogroms were sanctioned by the Tsarist government, with Cossacks and other Russians persecuting Jews with impunity. In 1903, 50 Jews were murdered, hundreds injured, and many Jewish homes and stores were pillaged in his hometown. Milestone, who came from an upper-middle-class family of non-observant Jews, had to be hidden inside his home for a week before being allowed to go outside to witness the devastation of the Jewish community. He traveled back to his hometown in 1930 and unsuccessfully tried to convince his brother to return with him to America. His brother was murdered in cold blood by the Nazis during World War II, so Milestone knew what it was to be on the side of the oppressed.
Put it down.
It's a nice shot of the rain behind Bud Bonin falling on the ground under the front door. So how are the background and politics of Milestone and Rossen relevant to Martha Ivers? As Milestone's biographer Harlow Robinson put it, the Ivers screenplay, quote, seethes with hatred for the injustices of capitalism, unquote. That's a strong statement, but as we'll see, not inaccurate. Critic Manny Farber extolled the film for portraying modern life as a jungle. Rossen and the sure directorial hand of Milestone take pains to show what happens when a dictatorial control of an entire town is vested in the hands of an individual. Justice is dispensed or not as seen fit. Police and the law are bought and paid for, while those who don't toe the line can be framed, abused, or run out of town. The Strange Love of Martha Ivers is more than the dark side of the American dream. Under the pen of Robert Rossen, the movie is a de facto indictment of the inherent injustices of American capitalism in the mid-20th century.
Stop. Now, when the police come, you will tell them exactly what you told me. Do you understand?
Bonin now preps the two kids to get their stories straight for the police.
Yes, Father.
You poor child.
And look at Janice Wilson's expression. She sees right through Bonin's phony comforting. Born in Santa Barbara, Janice Wilson made her debut as the object of Bette Davis's affection in Now Voyager, followed by playing Betty's daughter in Watch on the Rhine in 1943. She retired from acting after appearing in the B horror movie The Creeper in 1948. Claiming she didn't photograph well, she pursued a career as a singer, later becoming an organist and a choir director. Janice Wilson passed away in 2003. And we see Daryl Hickman leaving Iverstown and the film on a circus train. We dissolve into Iverstown 18 years later, in 1946. And this is a really cool transition from one train to another as their Van Heflin's convertible appears at a railroad crossing. Very nicely done. And that is none other than the future great writer-director Blake Edwards as a hitchhiking sailor sitting next to Heflin, who is taking in the latest racing results on the radio. Edwards became an actor in the films in 1942, usually as a soldier, sailor, or Marine. He was a corporal in The Best Years of Our Lives, before he established himself as an accomplished screenwriter and then a director of hits including Operation Petticoat, Breakfast at Tiffany's, Experiment in Terror, Days of Wine and Roses, and of course The Pink Panther and 10. And Heflin doesn't look where he's going after realizing he's back in Iverstown and smacks into a pole. Thinking of Blake Edwards, it's hard to believe he's been gone for 11 years.
End of the line, sailor. Come on, wake up. Where are we? In a small accident.
The crash didn't wake him up, but Heflin did.
The road curved, but I didn't. Come on, I've got to put into Iverstown for repairs.
Put into Iverstown for repairs. Put into is kind of a nautical expression that was entirely appropriate for Van Heflin. He was born in Oklahoma City in 1908. His dad was a dentist who moved the family to Long Beach near L.A. when Heflin was 12. Heflin graduated from Polytechnic High, where his classmates included future band leader Spike Jones. He became a merchant seaman and traveled the world. Heflin's early life is quite similar to the fictional carnival and gambling roustabout of Sam Masterson and Martha Ivers. Heflin also had a temper and could be handy with his fists, another similarity with his character in the film. And here's Walter Baldwin, an old-time character actor checking out the Fender, whose parts range from a dim-witted turnkey in Cry of the City, a blind man in Fastest Gun Alive, and he's probably best remembered as Harold Russell's father in The Best Years of Our Lives. The Crap Gang contingent here includes actor Harry Leonard at left and Sarah Deering on right.
Thanks. Shooting 20. Got it. 10 more, you don't make it. Then I do. How much will it cost, Pop?
Won't know till it's done.
Hey, now look, I want to know now.
Isn't it amazing how dealing with car repairs haven't changed in 75 years?
Welcome to Iverstown.
We interrupt this program of dinner music.
And that voice on the radio is none other than the great Art Gilmore, who was the voiceover king for movie previews and newsreels, and even voiced President Roosevelt in the movie Yankee Doodle Dandy in 1942.
Mr. O'Neill was suddenly taken ill.
I got to meet Gilmore on his 98th birthday when they hosted a tribute to him at the Egyptian Theater.
Citizens of Iverstown.
So Barbara Stanwyck makes her initial appearance in the film in an audio mode.
That's enough of that malarkey.
And this is the first instance of the coin-rolling gag on the fingers that Heflin came up with for the film, and we'll see a lot more of it.
You know him?
Yeah, I used to. Little scared kid on Sycamore Street. Now he's running for the district attorney. What's the odds?
On what?
The election.
No odds, no takers. This is a sure bet, mister. Going to be reelected. Going to be governor. And I'm making book right now that someday he'll run for president. Yep. Going to be whatever his wife wants him to be.
Walter Baldwin certainly has Kirk Douglas's character down cold. Martha runs the whole burg, including her hubby.
Old Lady Ivers' niece.
Martha Ivers?
Yep. Came into the whole works after the old lady died.
Well, what do you know? What do you know about that? Martha Ivers.
Kirk looks quite professorial in the picture with those horn rims on. And here's another creative shot by Milestone using a mirror to show Heflin remarking on Douglas's picture.
Hello, Gallagher.
Hey, wait a minute.
Yeah, Robert Rossen pops up, always the perpetual Irish cop. During a 30-year career beginning in 1917, Rossen appeared in over 390 pictures, more than 150 of them wearing a policeman's or sheriff's badge.
Think of it, I believe he did.
And Lizabeth Scott enters the film, leaving a boarding house and not surprisingly catching Van Heflin's eye. One of the several interesting aspects about Scott's role in her second film was her compensation. Lizabeth's initial 4-year deal with Hal Wallis called for $750 per week, so her first 6 weeks would have amounted to slightly over $5,000. But Wallis had her down for $7,500 anyway, even though it was the lowest salary of all the principal players by far. Hal Wallis's reputation as a producer was partly governed by his propensity for squeezing a nickel hard enough to make the buffalo keel over. But in Miss Scott's case, he initially was quite generous. When he signed her, he rented her an apartment in Hollywood, arranged for her driver's license, bought her a car, and gave her a Christmas bonus in 1945. Wallis would renegotiate her contract several times for more money, but ensured she got the red carpet treatment while traveling on location and during studio publicity events. In reviewing Wallis's papers, he spent untold hours of effort and dollars to making Lizabeth Scott into a movie star. Why did he do this? Well, because he believed in her looks and talent, and also because he was madly in love with her. Hal Wallis and Lizabeth Scott shared an intimate relationship that continued into the early 1950s.
Got the time?
Scott's first contract with Hal Wallis reads like a term of indentured servitude from the 16th century. Having looked at a lot of these period artist contracts, this one is about as one-sided as it could get. Quote, artist agrees to render services exclusively to producer and to devote artist's entire time and attention and best talent and efforts to such services throughout the term of this agreement, and agrees further that at no time during the term thereof, and regardless of whether or not artists shall actually be rendering services or receiving compensation hereunder, will artists engage in any occupation of any kind or render services to any person, firm, or corporation or on artist's own account, either within or outside business hours, except for provided for under the terms of this agreement. No expiration or termination of this agreement shall affect the ownership by producer of the results and proceeds of the services rendered by artists hereunder, or alter any of the rights of producer or any warranty or undertaking on the part of the artist in connection therewith. Artist agrees that producer may in its absolute discretion omit artist entirely or partially from any production or may substitute another in artist's place. I'm out of breath, but the bottom line is Lizabeth Scott was tethered to Hal Wallis by a contractual umbilical cord that amounted to ownership.
Bus terminal. Please hurry. I've got an 11:30 bus to catch.
Tom Fadden is the cab driver who picks up Liz, and then she picks up Van. Another interesting facet of Scott's role is her character's name, Tony Marichek. The surname of Marichek is Slavic, and according to Ancestry.com, the largest population of Maricheks during the first quarter of the last century were in Pennsylvania, the setting of the movie. And Pennsylvania is also the home state of Lizabeth Scott, who was born as Emma Matzo, the daughter of a Slavic immigrant grocer, on September 29, 1922.
Mr. Masterson.
Sam.
Although her roots were definitely working class, Lizabeth was the oldest child in a family that was artistically inclined. She was indulged with piano lessons, singing, and elocution lessons beginning when she was 8 years old. And it wasn't only her. According to Scott in a 1984 interview with Ronald L. Davis, my brothers played the violin and my sisters played the piano. I had no interest or desire to become part of this thing called show business. My desire when it came to performing was singing. I would listen to Lily Pons on the radio and I thought, I want to be a coloratura soprano. I was taking singing lessons at the time, and of course that was an impossibility with my voice, and Scott laughed.
What's it like?
Big.
And now we're at the Iverstown bus terminal, which was situated on the Paramount lot. In Lizabeth Scott's studio and Wikipedia biographies, it stated that she worked in plays in Scranton Central High School, then spent the summer working in a stock theater called the May Desmond Players. Both of these assertions were fabricated. She tried for 4 years to land a role in a high school play and couldn't do it. As she told Davis, I finally got 2 lines in a play. I guess the teacher of drama took pity on me. I was so excited about those 2 lines, as I remember, I didn't deliver them coherently, and that was the beginning of my career. As for the May Desmond Players, Scott said, I made up summer work with May Desmond Stock Company, so when I went to New York, I could say I had a lot of experience in stock. I pulled her name out of the air. Yet another reason to take studio-generated, fan magazine, and internet biographical information with a huge grain of salt.
Tell the clerk that Sam Masterson wants a room for a young lady. She'll register when she gets there.
Yes, sir. Thanks.
Keep it.
Scott claimed the inspiration to become an actress occurred when her aunt, she said she had 2 aunts who were college educated, took her to see the 1933 movie version of Alice in Wonderland. I was so charmed, I told Aunt Barbara I want to be an actress. This sounds like a rote story from a studio biography, but who knows?
There were nothing but saloons. My father used to live in them.
Mine, too.
We're related.
I'll have the same thing you have if you don't mind.
The waiter here is played by Bill Dury. One aspect of her early life that is accurate is she was raised by her mother to be well-read. She claimed her aunts would talk philosophy, Nietzsche, Rousseau, Durant. Scott added, knowledge was the thing. Mother insisted on reading. Have you finished that book? I loved to read and I wrote rather well. Scott's mother pretty much forced her to attend college. Lizabeth lasted 6 months and then left for New York. She was very ambitious, saying, I hurried, and of course that's the way my career was. I hurried, and I had success at a very young age. I remember at 14 saying to myself, life is going on, with or without you. It's really up to you. She added, you have to understand me. If I've got a project or I've got a goal, nothing can deter me from that goal. I was very, very impatient. I want to achieve success then. One cannot help wondering how much of Scott's stated impatience and burning ambition played into her relationship with Hal Wallis.
He drank himself to death by now.
Another man I know talks cold like that's my dad. He's the most cold.
In Rossen's original story, the Tony Marichek character was a prostitute. In 1946, this did not pass muster with the prudish Joe Breen, whose enforcement of the production code governing movie content can only be described as zealous. In a September 6, 1945 letter to Hal Wallis, Breen was emphatic. It will be necessary for you to affirmatively establish that Tony is quite definitely not, and not was underlined, a prostitute, and that her relationship with Sam is a clean one. It will be acceptable if it is clearly established that she was sent to prison for theft, though it would help very much if it was indicated that the false charge, again in the stealing of the coat business, would not suggest, even by inference, that the coat was given to her by a guy who later disappears. Breen got about half to 2/3 of what he asked for as the script was modified, but not nearly as much as he wanted. Breen had also asked that the scene of Judith Anderson striking the kitten with her cane should be merely suggested and not shown. His motivation for this and other recommended omissions were to prevent the politicized state and local censor boards from deleting portions of the film. With Breen, with exceptions for his fanatical, obsessions over religion, women's breasts, and never ever showing a toilet on screen, his missives to studio executives were usually always about
I don't
business.
think you'll take up too much room in my Stanley steamer.
Maybe you're all right.
You think you can hold that thought all the way to the coast?
I know for a fact that Kirk Douglas, whom Wallace originally considered for the Sam Masterson role played by Heflin, had to swallow hard to play Walter O'Neill, a weak character at odds with Douglas's virile nature on and off screen. But it was his first movie. Does anyone enter a scene with more command than Barbara Stanwyck? I don't think so, particularly not in this film. In 1926, the legendary Broadway producer David Belasco told a young Ruby Stevens that she didn't know how to walk properly. "Go to the zoo," he said, "watch the animals." Stevens watched the lions pace in their cages and imitated them. A short time later, Belasco and playwright-actor Willard Mack had Ruby Stevens change her name to Barbara Stanwyck. And here's a young Kirk Douglas passed out on the divan. I'll let Kirk on the special featurette tell you how he got his first movie role in Martha Ivers. After all, one doesn't tug on Spartacus's cape. By 1945, Barbara Stanwyck had been starring in Hollywood movies for 16 years, and she was already a legend. In an interview, the experienced Lewis Milestone sounded somewhat awed. Working with Barbara Stanwyck was among the most pleasant experiences I've ever had. In this respect, she and Ingrid Bergman are rivals. Both were great, but Stanwyck is cooperative and tough. She can take all kinds of physical hardship. I can understand why everyone adores her. She's also very knowledgeable. She'll walk on the set and look up to see where the lights are in relation to the camera. She'll say to the cameraman, "I can help you. I need a key light, and that light over there is wrong. Readjust the key light and we're in business." She was that knowledgeable, and everybody is mad about her to this day.
I did not make a public display of myself anywhere.
You realize, of course, that you will one day, inevitably.
Inevitably.
It's your career, not mine.
What's mine is yours.
As Babs interrogates Kirk, we start getting an insight into the dysfunctional mess that is Martha and Walter's marriage, and how Walter, a young man, is already a ruined, cowardly drunk, totally dominated by his powerful wife. One thing that I think Kirk left out in his featurette concerned his screen test for Ivers, and that was how Milestone handled his nervousness of being in front of the camera for the first time. Kirk said, "I had a 6-page scene to do. We kept rehearsing until finally the director, Lewis Milestone, said, 'Now, do you feel ready to shoot it?' I took a deep breath and said, 'Yes.' Milestone said, 'Go home, I already shot it.' What a wonderful, painless way to do a screen test. I was grateful to him." Kirk said he learned the importance of relaxing in front of the camera, not feeling intimidated by it, not being self-conscious. What Milestone did for me was the marvelous thing for someone just starting out in the movies, the lesson being to forget the camera is there.
The dreams he worked so hard for. His son.
This is what's called expositionary dialogue, as Kirk brings us all up to date on what has transpired with Martha, his late unlamented father, and himself, since Martha's aunt took her well-deserved tumble down the staircase.
Get up and speak before people.
Walter, listen to me. What's done is done.
You notice how Barbara tries to rationalize things and soothe Kirk as if her husband is a child or a pet.
Your father was right.
He was never right about anything. From the day he walked in and found your aunt on the floor.
I told you I never want that mentioned.
She never wants what happened to her aunt mentioned, but she continued to live in the same house. This is a dark character that only Stanwyck could play. Paramount and Wallace knew it too, particularly after her memorable turn in Double Indemnity. Some of the suggested taglines for promoting Ivers were, "Lucretia Borgia was a baby compared to Martha Ivers," "Delilah was harmless compared to Martha Ivers," or "Mata Hari was guileless compared to Martha Ivers. In the end, they decided they didn't want to turn Stanwyck into Gail Sundergaard as the Spider-Woman, so the more subtle, "Fate drew them together and only murder could part them," and "Whisper her name" were the principal publicity taglines for the film.
I did get drunk.
Walter, dear, listen to me. If you carry a thing in your mind that makes you sick, I want you well. Tomorrow...
It will be like today.
You will leave on a trip for your health for a few weeks.
Will you go with me?
No. I'll stay here.
And I'll stay here, too.
She wants to get Kirk out of the picture. Stanwyck was a pro's pro as an actress. She said acting is thinking. It's hard to believe that her first screen test, which was at Warner Brothers in 1929, done without a script and directed by Alexander Korda, was adjudged by some studio suit as, quote, neither person, Stanwyck or Korda, has anything to offer motion pictures. Kirk Douglas was intimidated by Barbara, but noted the crew adored her. They called her Missy. And when she came on the set, she went around hugging them, asking about their wives and children by name. She was a professional. She was there, always prepared, an excellent actress. But as Kirk would tell you, she certainly didn't come close to hugging him. Stanwyck was about the work and respected only those who knew the work. That's why she admired the crew, the gaffers, the prop men, the grips, saying, they know a lot about making pictures. They know more about this business than a lot of people sitting in the front offices. They're closer to it. You can learn something from every one of them. Kirk was a beginner. He had to earn her respect, and she thought initially that he had nothing he could teach her. So between takes, she ignored Douglas. This was the opposite of how she handled a 21-year-old green William Holden in 1939 when they made Golden Boy together. Holden was about to be fired, but Stanwyck interceded for him and saved his bacon. She spent time off camera working with a nervous Holden, running lines, showing him how to move in front of the camera, and they formed a bond of true friendship. At the 1978 Academy Awards, Holden and Stanwyck were presenters of the Best Sound Award. Holden went off script to thank her publicly for saving his career during Golden Boy, a very emotional and genuine moment. Liz and Van arrive at the hotel. Former vaudevillian performer Frank Orth, always a singular presence, is the hotel clerk. This was another dicey sequence where Hal Wallace had to walk a tightrope with the censor's office over the unmarried Sam Masterson and Tony Marichek sharing a hotel room. Joe Breen wrote Wallace on August 2, 1945. Some other business device must be used instead of the present sleeping arrangements of 2 sleeping rooms with a connecting bath. It must be made absolutely clear that there is no illicit sex between these two if the finished picture is to be maintained. Then Breen adds, of course, any interpretation of their relationship by Martha could readily be maintained. In this case, Wallace stood his ground by adding some whimsy with Frank Orth about the connecting bath and the fact that they are not married and require separate rooms. It was really difficult to have routine adult content in movies during the 1940s.
The boy went off for 12. You'll have to manage yourselves. I can't leave the board. Thanks. Good night. Sweet dreams. Good night, Cupid. 25. Your room number's 25. I'm 23. Makes us neighbors.
When Lizabeth Scott left Pennsylvania and attended drama school in New York City, she lived in a girls' residence hall, the Ferguson residence on 82nd Street. Although her family reportedly wasn't enthused about her ambition to become an actress, they paid her tuition and subsidized her living expenses. So they do end up in adjoining rooms with a connecting bath.
Better get out of those wet clothes. I've started your bath for you. Hurry up now, I'm next.
Thanks.
Almost looks like she has a nightgown on under her dress. And what girl wouldn't want to shower with Miklos Rozsa composed violins playing in the background? Scott got her first break by landing a role in the roadshow company of Helzapopping. This wasn't the hit Broadway Screamlined review with Olson and Johnson, but a road company of the same show led by Billy House and Eddie Garr. According to Lizabeth, I was, which I laughingly call now, the leading lady of Helzapoppin'. I did all the sketches, and it was a wonderful experience. I was with them for a year, visited every state, and had 65 one-night stands in succession. One thing that stuck with her during her Hellzapoppin' tour was working with some old vaudevillians who were in the show. Scott said, "Some were very prominent in vaudeville. I remember saying, 'My God, I never want to be a penniless actress. There's nothing sadder.'" Scott assiduously avoided being broke. She saved and invested her money and lived in the same rather modest house above the eastern edge of the Sunset Strip on Hollywood Boulevard from the time she bought it in 1950 to her death in 2015. It recently sold for $2.45 million, 37% over the asking price, which would have undoubtedly pleased her.
Practically every room of every hotel in the world. It tells all about it there in the first page or so.
I can't help but believe this tete-a-tete between Heflin and Scott, both in bathrobes with a Bible placed on the bed, was a sop to mollify Joe Breen in the censor's office over the shared room and bath situation.
That's really a picture.
Throw me a match. So you're leaving tomorrow?
Yeah, we're leaving tomorrow.
And there's the coin again.
Sure you won't mind me being a passenger?
That of the company.
Are you gonna stay in the West?
Maybe, maybe not. You might get lonesome again.
I've been lonesome before.
They're actually almost sitting on the same bed, albeit briefly, daring stuff for 1946, although Breen insisted that Heflin couldn't have a glass of whiskey in his hand during this scene.
I just got out tonight.
And Liz confesses she's a jailbird, but that doesn't make a bit of difference to Van.
We leave tomorrow. I think you like that.
Heflin kind of treats Scott like she's a kid sister, in that you don't feel the connectivity between two of them. He combs his hair carefully. Marcia Hunt told me when she acted with Heflin in Kid Glove Killer during a fight scene, his toupee came off and they had to do a retake. And he ends up tucking her in. Scott didn't do much acting after the Hellzapoppin' tour ended, but she became financially independent, being a model. During her movie career, Scott would be labeled the threat, as a look and sound alike to Lauren Bacall. But even earlier, she was taken as a Bacall doppelganger by Diana Vreeland, who spotted Scott when she visited Harper's Bazaar. Scott said of Vreeland, "She was taken with me because of Lauren Bacall. They were fond of her and became fond of me. They, Harper's Bazaar, were most kind and generous to me." So he lets Scott sleep on without awakening her and leaves the room with a bottle of whiskey. Yeah, okay.
Open up, Sonny.
The bellboy lets in two vice cops played by James Flavin and Max Wagner. Flavin enters first. Flavin was a West Point graduate who ditched the Army for acting in Hollywood. His career spanned from the second mate in the original King Kong to In Cold Blood and The Brady Bunch on television. The ominous-looking Wagner was born in Mexico, the son of a railroad conductor. He had an interesting early life. His mother, Edith Wagner, was a writer and correspondent for the Christian Science Monitor during the Mexican Revolution. Wagner was 10 years old when Mexican rebels fatally wounded his father. His mother then brought him to Salinas, California, where he struck up a lifelong friendship with John Steinbeck. Wagner served as the model for the boy in Steinbeck's novel The Red Pony and would appear in several films based on Steinbeck's books. Wagner was memorable to baby boomers as an Army sergeant in the 1952 cult sci-fi film Invaders from Mars. This scene with Heflin being rousted by the cops is illustrative of Rossen's perspective of the American police being a law unto themselves. There's no warrant, there's no sense of knocking, there's not even a fiction of being polite, just doing whatever they want, and there's nothing that can be done about it except put up with it.
Suspense is killing me. What do you want to know?
You've been around. Look at that. Africa, Anzio, and Normandy.
Although he wasn't a combat hero in real life, Van Heflin joined the Army Reserve when he attended the University of Oklahoma. He served with the Army's first motion picture unit during World War II, became a marksman, and made a training film titled Land and Live in the Jungle that was filmed in Panama. Heflin was stationed in London and was on his way to pick up some clothes at a tailor shop when one of Hitler's V-1 rockets destroyed the shop and half the block just before he got there.
Theft. Terms of her probation when she was released yesterday was that she returned to her home in Ridgeville. An hour ago, we picked her up at the depot and she tried to cash the ticket.
Well, maybe she wanted to go by train. Maybe she wanted to walk. There's no law that says she...
That's not the reason she gave, wise guy.
No?
No. The reason she gave was that she'd got a job. Said you were her employer.
Well, what's wrong with that?
Nothing if you can prove it. But take a tip from me, Bud, don't try it. Jake and me don't like to waste our time testifying.
Jake and me. At this point, the specific charge that Liz went away from is left unsaid. But the underlying point is that she doesn't have any influence or power, so she can be pushed around by these two esteemed officers of the law. And then they take her suitcase.
Leave her things alone.
You want to come along, soldier?
Scared boy.
And now Heflin starts down the road to confront a past he wasn't even aware of.
Great big favor.
And there's the great character actress Anne Duran, whose career started when Mary Pickford spotted her at the age of 11, sitting on a pile of lumber near the set of Douglas Fairbanks' Robin Hood in 1922. She made 500 motion pictures and possibly 1,000 TV shows, working with everyone from Fairbanks Sr. to the Three Stooges. She was also James Dean's mom in Rebel Without a Cause. It's a nice little flirting scene she has with Heflin here.
When he buzzes. Here.
I'll take calls now.
Kirk needs to get half a load on to take calls and start his day. Kirk shared a similar background with Lewis Milestone, as Douglas's father was also a Russian Jew who fled the pogroms and came to America, as did Milestone. Douglas's childhood was rough. The title of his book, The Ragman's Son, is factual. Kirk experienced both anti-Semitism and poverty. He graduated from St. Lawrence University and started acting at the Tamarack Playhouse, where he ditched the name of Isser Danilovich and won a scholarship to the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. Douglas remarked about the tough emotional and financial journey of becoming an actor, saying, "The best thing an actor can do is stop others from becoming actors." As he mentioned in his introduction to The Strange Love of Martha Ivers, the picture started him smoking cigarettes. Something I have in common with Kirk is how he quit smoking. He carried a single cigarette around with him, and when he wanted to light up, he'd take the cigarette out of his pocket, look at it, and say, "Who's stronger, me or you?" My name's Spartacus. I did the same thing when I quit smoking 28 years ago, except I didn't talk to the cigarette. Just took it out, then put it back in my pocket. It sounds silly, but it worked for both of us.
Beautiful.
I'm married.
I know. You've done all right.
I guess so. And you, what have you done?
Knocked around, seen a lot, I guess. You know,
As I mentioned, Heflin was a knock-around guy in the Merchant Marine until he seized onto acting. He met director-producer Richard Boleslawski, who put him in a play, Mr. Moneypenny. Then Heflin went back to sea and returned for good to tackle acting in earnest. He studied at the Yale Dramatic School in 1932, and he became an adherent to the Del Sarti system of acting technique, which I found interesting. Francois Del Sarti was a Frenchman born in 1811. He began to study how humans moved, behaved, and responded to various emotional and real-life situations. By observing people in real life and in public places of all kinds, he discovered certain patterns of expression, eventually called the science of applied aesthetics. He saw that movement involves symbiotics, a sign system that can be read by observers. Thus, the body encodes meaning which the viewer can decode. He recognized that physical signs come from various sources. Some gestures are ours alone to express our individuality. Some are social or cultural conventions like waving hello. But the complexity of Del Sarti's system is both a daunting and a potential advantage. It specifies a vast range of potential gestures and postures by working through a series of principles that define a space of variations across head orientation, stances, hand shapes, leg positions, and so forth.
Please have her wait.
Del Sarti also argues how the zones of the body and space around the body tend to be associated with differing intellectual, emotional, and physical interpretations.
Mrs. O'Neill, come in.
Yes, sir.
Stanwyck plays this so well, not recognizing Heflin immediately, and then watch the change in her when she finds out who he is after the whistle.
I'm sorry. Sammy Masterson. Oh!
And look at Kirk, not a happy camper. An object lesson from Martha Ivers is that jealousy always flows from insecurity. Finishing up with this Del Sarti, all I can say is how Van Heflin was able to incorporate all of this mumbo-jumbo into his acting seems daunting to me. I almost get a headache reading and thinking about it, but it obviously worked for him.
There are lots of things.
I never figured that a skinny little mutt would grow up so beautiful.
I thank you for my wife.
That sounds funny.
What does?
Well, you're saying my wife.
Does it?
Oh, now don't get so, Walter. I mean, well, I've always thought of Martha's. Well, you know how it is. You keep something in your mind.
You can see what's going to happen. Barbara wants him to stay, and Kirk would like him to leave now.
Oh?
Yeah, I may have to pull out in a couple of hours.
Oh, that's too bad.
That's the way things are, you know.
I don't want to be disturbed.
Well, that's all right, Walter. You're a busy man. So
Van thinks he's getting a favor from an old friend, but it'll turn out to be the opposite. Production began on Love Lies Bleeding on October 1st, 1945, a 45-day shooting schedule which was fairly generous in those days. Additional heft was added to the crew when Robert Aldrich replaced Dick McWhorter as the assistant director little more than halfway through the shooting schedule. Easily the most significant event that occurred during the film's production was a massive strike that roiled Hollywood and threatened to shut down production at Warner Brothers, Fox, Paramount, RKO, and the other studios. The Hollywood labor wars of the 1940s is an extremely complex and fascinating part of American social history that I hope to write about in detail someday. There were a large number of people involved over a period of several decades, so for the sake of brevity, I'll try to limit my comments on the run-up and how it affected Martha Ivers and Paramount. When you listen to Kirk Douglas's introduction, he mentions how the strike affected his participation in the picture.
This is the first time I've ever seen you off balance.
Off balance. Their marriage may be a mess, but Kirk knows his wife. The two main antagonists of the 1945 Hollywood labor strike were the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees, or IATSE, I'll call them the IA, and the Conference of Studio Unions, or the CSU. Both of these unions were umbrella organizations that represented a number of local unions of different crafts who worked at the studios: stage employees, painters, carpenters, animators, mechanics, grips, etc. The IA had been dominated by Chicago-based gangsters since the mid-1930s, with the major studio heads paying off the Hollywood representative, a former pimp and leg breaker named Willie Beoff, for labor peace. Or they were being extorted, depending on what side you want to believe. The CSU was more of a socialist left-wing organization led by a tough mug named Herb Sorrell.
See blackmail in his eyes.
I haven't your experience with criminals.
You will.
Notice how Kirk, who's been throwing down drinks since the scene in his office began, and how he's playing this now under the influence, slightly loaded. Really a brilliant piece of acting. Walter is a functional alcoholic to whom booze has become medicine that allows him to get through the day.
Yes, Mr. O'Neill.
I want a routine check on a Samuel Masterson, non-resident, registered Gable Hotel. Miss St. John, close the door. I want a routine check of all garages. One of them has his car. Stay here, please. I want to check up on all local...
The initial squabble between the IA and CSU was over who would represent the studio set decorators, and the CSU won at arbitration, but the studios and the IA refused to recognize the decision, and that set the CSU up for striking the major studios in March 1945. Over 10,000 workers went out on strike, delaying several pictures, but the studios had a backlog of over 140 films to release and weathered the strike.
Surely you didn't expect to wait that long.
I was just going to look at the pictures. I found your message when I got back to the hotel.
I think this scene between Heflin and Stanwyck is among the best in the picture. Just two great actors, and you end up feeling the sexual heat between the two of them. This is an attribute one doesn't sense between Heflin and Lizabeth Scott. I think this is partially due to Rossen's script. As good as it was, I think he shortchanged Liz on the lines and the dialogue. Also, Joe Breen's interference certainly didn't help matters for the development of the Tony Marichuk character. Back to the 1945 strike, the CSU became desperate and decided they had to shut down production at one of the major studios, and they picked Warner Brothers. On October 5th, 1945, known afterwards as Hollywood's Bloody Friday, CSU strikers circled Warner's main gate on Olive Street and attempted to shut down the studio. They were greeted with charged fire hose and IA goons with debris thrown on the strikers from inside the studio. The Burbank police declared the strike an unlawful assembly and waded in with nightsticks. Cars were overturned and a general riot ensued, with Sorrell and his retinue being beaten up and arrested, while Jack Warner and his staff of armed security guards observed the proceedings from a soundstage roof. The irreverent Warner screenwriter Julius Epstein suggested Warner's change their logo from combining good citizenship with good picture making to combining good citizenship with good marksmanship.
You lived here all the time then, huh?
Except for the few years I went to college. Mr. O'Neill, Walter's father thought it would be good for me to get...
This rather large set is a series of different sound stages used to portray Stanwyck's mansion.
Yes.
On October 22, 1945, the CSU strikers moved to Paramount and tried to shut down production by keeping people from entering the studio via the famous studio gate on Van Ness Avenue. They weren't successful as another riot broke out as hired IA goons, studio police, and regular cops battled the CSU pickets. The headline in the Los Angeles Citizen News screamed, "Paramount hit in biggest film riot." Production on Martha Ivers, though, continued with one notable exception. Director Lewis Milestone refused to cross the picket line. Byron Haskin, an old Warner special effects and assistant director whom Wallace was grooming as a feature director, took over for a day or so until the strike was settled on October 25th. Cast and crew had to duck down in cars to enter the studio or were led through other entrances.
So I bought some animals. Well, my lion got the mange and gave it to the monkeys. The animals became a responsibility and a liability. I lost all my hard-earned cash and ran like a thief out of there with a great...
This dialogue coming up about both of them becoming a man and a woman officially and having been there before is so subtly suggestive. I suppose it went way over Mr. Breen's head because he was more worried about adjoining bathrooms.
How did it feel to become a man officially?
I felt I'd been there before. How did you feel about becoming a woman officially?
I felt I'd been there too.
And the inference is they had both been there together. For an insight into Lewis Milestone's character regarding his refusal to cross the CSU picket line, there's this. Milestone left Russia when he was 17 and boarded a ship from Hamburg that landed in Hoboken, New Jersey. Penniless, he stayed with some relatives in New York City while working a series of thankless menial jobs, including hauling barrels of rubber cement in a Lower East Side raincoat factory. He quickly became involved in a labor dispute and took the side of those attempting to organize a company union. When a foreman struck him with a yardstick for giving information on scab hires to union organizers, Milestone stabbed him with a pair of scissors and took off. During his years in Hollywood, Milestone always took the side of the unions and workers. Back during World War I, when Leslie Ruggles told Milestone he had made $1,500 per week before the war, the young theater enthusiast left for Hollywood in 1919. Milestone began at the bottom and worked his way up as an editor, a gag writer for Max Sennett, and then he worked with Henry King and at the Thomas Ince Studios. He ended up collaborating with a 25-year-old Darryl F. Zanuck at Warner Brothers for Seven Sinners, a comedy. Under contract at Warner's, he was lent out to Paramount for $1,500 per week to make a film with Harold Lloyd, of which he, Milestone, was being paid only $400 a week. Milestone demanded Jack Warner pay him the difference. JL being JL, he refused, so Milestone walked out on his contract. Warner sued the director for $200,000 and won, but Milestone was undaunted. He declared bankruptcy and went to work at Paramount. In 1926, Milestone began directing another comedy starring Gloria Swanson. When Milestone wouldn't accede to Swanson's demands to change the script, he quit again. These and other episodes earned Milestone a maverick reputation with producers and studio heads. Of course, the actors and crews loved him because he was a straight shooter.
As a matter of fact, you sounded just like your aunt used to.
And now Van confronts Stanwyck. He's not ready to bow down to her like everyone else in her Iverstown empire.
As soon as a certain young lady's out of your husband's clink and my car's out of Dempsey's alleged garage, I'm headed west.
I think you really mean that.
Any objections?
No. No objections. I should have known if I remembered.
You should have known what?
You.
I think part of the attraction for Babs is that Van Heflin's character won't take her shit.
Sorry that you ever left here. Sam, for old time's sake.
Yeah. Sure, for old time's sake.
For old time's sake, as the flames are rekindled. But one thing about Martha Ivers, she does the walking out. No one walks out on her.
Bye, Martha.
And Heflin senses that something's wrong with her. Walter Baldwin returns, and he's with Charles D. Brown, a great stage actor who appeared in over 40 Broadway plays, including 1926's The Noose, which included the first Broadway dramatic stage appearance by one Barbara Stanwyck, who's calling because she's determined to keep Van Heflin on her leash.
You can add this to your report. Miss O'Neill don't like this guy to go. Not yet.
All right, Dempsey, thanks. Drink?
Drink? I don't think it matters what time of the day it is for Kirk or Brown. It's always the cocktail hour.
In a couple of hours.
What's he look like so far?
He's a big shot gambler. Broke many times, but always turns up with a new bankroll. The police in every state have tried to find the source of his money, but no dice. Many arrests, no convictions. Beat a murder rap in Frisco. Self-defense. Has a war record.
Ann Savage told me working with Charles D. Brown was a pleasure because he was just such a total pro as an actor.
How long will it take to fix it? Well? Who did Dempsey get this call from? Didn't you check that?
Yes, I checked it.
Then who was it?
Mrs. O'Neill.
The cliche, the plot thickens, is appropriate for this moment as Kirk now knows his wife wants to keep Van in town.
Yes, Mr. O'Neill?
Get me to the county jail. I want the superintendent of the women's division. Yes?
Kirk now hatches a plan. You know, Kirk couldn't pick one favorite director, but he did provide a list. He said, I've enjoyed working with Billy Wilder, William Wyler, Joseph L. Mankiewicz, Howard Hawks, and Elia Kazan. He also said he did 3 films with Vincente Minnelli and got nominated for 2 of them, but I never could name just one director. Douglas certainly liked Milestone, but he wasn't on the list. And Van is back rolling his coin again with the stranger asking for the time is Bill Burt. In Hollywood, Heflin was kind of a hybrid. He was a character actor who was also a leading man for a time until he got older and became much more of a character player. Interestingly, Heflin hated the stage at first, saying, "I felt as an actor I was just a good sailor." In other words, he initially didn't think he was any good, but that would change. And this is some of Scott's best work in the film as she's getting browbeaten by Kirk Douglas to set up Heflin. Scott could project a definite vulnerability, and she had a good, light comedic talent that really wasn't exploited as she became typed as a noir siren and, the bad girl, which, by the way, she didn't like at all. I knew Lizabeth Scott very casually. We had several phone conversations, and I attended a screening of Martha Ivers at the Academy and got to sit and chat with her for a while. Her favorite film was Pitfall, in which she played a young lady who has an extramarital affair with Dick Powell with disastrous results for both of them. One of my favorite Scott roles is Too Late for Tears, 1950, a film I was involved with restoring with the Film-Noir Foundation. Scott plays a greedy sociopath who is revealed to be a serial killer. She told Ronald Davis, "I hated that role, but there was nothing I could do about it." By 1950, Hal Wallis had largely given up on his campaign to make her a major star, but he still cared for her. However, Wallis's other love and Scott's main competition was the producer's affinity for money. He loaned her out, always paying her considerably less than the loan-out fee as he pocketed the difference.
Told me you'd be out at 6.
O'Neill?
Yeah, sure, the district attorney's an old friend.
By 1951, she was appearing in a Robert L. Lippert production of A Stolen Face for $25,000, a long way from playing opposite Humphrey Bogart in Dead Reckoning in 1946. Lizabeth's expression of misery in this shot for portraying Van is certainly easy to spot.
Oh, you're a cinch, you'll buy a dozen. Hey, taxi! I'm gonna toss you a real coming-out party. Hey, taxi!
Milestone's camera doesn't move that often in this film, but when it does, it's with a purpose and done with a suppleness, as this dolly shot of the pair entering the restaurant shows.
Thanks. Spaghetti. That looks wonderful.
I think you'll like it.
As Scott's appetite has vanished, I should mention why her film career made a similar exit in the 1950s. She didn't elaborate too much about it, only saying, "I had grown and decided I need to pursue other portions of my existence, and that was it." I think that statement might have had more to do with her relationship with Hal Wallis than her film career. As the film noir movies that she made her mark in morphed into television and the studio system receded, and Scott got older, the roles became fewer in number and her career became more problematic. Scott's career was already in descent when Confidential magazine published a smear piece in September 1955 that stealthily labeled her as a lesbian. She filed a $2.5 million slander suit against the magazine that was eventually dismissed on a technicality. After taking a stab at a singing career with a vocal LP, Hal Wallis lured her back a final time to play Elvis Presley's publicity agent in Loving You, 1957. In her mid-30s, Scott realized she was attempting to retrieve a lost game. Although Wallis continued to woo her for various film roles into the early 1960s, she declined his entreaties. With the exception of several TV appearances in the quirky movie Pulp in 1972, Scott's retirement from acting was permanent.
The charge is theft. You do 1 to 5.
Well, how come they gave you probation?
First offense. You know what probation is.
Oh, sure. Knife sticking in your back.
Yeah, Heflin knows the score. He's been around.
Still looking out for the cops? Relax, now you're free.
I don't feel so good.
You only take you back to the hotel?
Oh, no, please. Let me sit here a while.
Here's John Kellogg, a distinctive actor who appeared in Out of the Past, 12 O'Clock High, Edge of the City, and many other films and a lot of television. While researching Kellogg, I came across a 2006 article in the LA Times by his daughter, Cheryl Kellogg Phillips, titled The Untouchable, a reference both to her father's appearance in the 1960s TV crime series and the fact that he was a heel who abandoned both her and her mom and didn't pay a cent for years in child support. Kellogg surfaced years later to present his daughter with a couple of free Dodger tickets he was given at a golf tournament that she tore up in front of him. Apparently, John Kellogg's casting in this particular role was realistic.
I just want to make sure.
Somewhat of a plot hole here. Why doesn't Van Heflin question Kellogg's assertion of marriage to Scott?
Certain wise guys have to be taught a lesson. Certain wise guys have
Where
to be...
do you want it, here or outside?
Outside.
That smirk.
There's an alley through the kitchen door.
Sam.
Shut up.
Stay here.
And he signals the three hoods to go out and beat up Heflin. Quite the district attorney is Kirk Douglas. Liz gets congratulated here by Brown, who just picks up Heflin's glass of wine and starts drinking it.
Now blow.
Yes, sir.
And grabs the bottle for a refill. This is a really good shot by director of photography Victor Milne of Heflin being beaten in the back of the car while a horrified Liz looks on. As Van crawls out of the ditch, beaten and bloody, there was a humorous variety squib about this sequence. On November 1st, 1945, the old Mack Sennett pie-throwing technique was employed yesterday by Lewis Milestone in mussing up Van Heflin on the set of Hal Wallace's Love Lies Bleeding at Paramount. Heflin, in a sequence in which he is supposed to have been lying battered and unconscious in a ditch all night, didn't look messy enough to suit Milestone. So the director started throwing gobs of muck at the actor and incited other members of the cast to do the same. To some worried visitors on the set, Heflin cracked, "Don't get excited, I get a lousy fortune to look this lousy." This is another well-constructed shot from behind Heflin, showing him flag down the bus as it is headed directly for him down the highway. Victor Milner was a pioneer cameraman who began in the business during the days of Nickelodeons. He filmed the U.S. Army occupation of Veracruz for Pathé News in 1914 and lensed 8 pictures for Cecil B. DeMille and 4 for Hal Wallace, including The Furies and Dark City. And this is a nice tracking shot passing between the buses as Heflin emerges to stalk Scott and then pull her off the bus. Very thoughtfully planned and executed.
Go ahead, Bud. You catch the next one.
The bus driver doesn't even say a word. Yanks her off the bus.
Cut that. Crime's not gonna get you anywhere.
I'll stop.
I ought to beat it out of you.
I think maybe I got it coming.
Why? Why?
Last night in that restaurant, I kept trying to tell you.
Come on, get down to it.
Liz now spills to Van about Kirk setting him up. Director Lewis Milestone was quoted in an article in the Los Angeles Sun-Mirror on 8 December 1946 as having said he would never make another picture with producer Hal Wallace because Wallace wanted to reshoot scenes in this film for more close-ups of Lizabeth Scott. Milestone reportedly told Wallace, "Go shoot them himself," which is exactly what he did. Millie Milestone was editing combat footage for the Army Single Corps during World War I while Hal Wallace was selling appliances back in his hometown of Chicago. Wallace was the boss, but Milestone wasn't going to put up with any producer telling him how to shoot a picture. Milestone became a photographer's assistant in 1915 and during the Great War worked in the Army's photo lab in Washington, D.C., with a fellow from Brooklyn named Joe Sternberg who would reinvent himself in Hollywood as Joseph von Sternberg. The great director of photography James Wong Howe once said von Sternberg was the only director he knew who was capable of lighting a set by himself. I think he could have said the same thing about Milestone, who really knew photography and lighting inside and out. So Milestone and Victor Milner really made for an accomplished photographic team in this movie.
Kid, I'll tell you what you do. You grab the next bus out and I'll meet you wherever you say.
I'll go back with you.
Good.
As Van and Liz plan their escape, the violins enter, and the scene nicely dissolves.
Just a moment, sir.
Take me to Mr. O'Neill and you won't get hurt.
Yes, Mr. Masterson. I hardly recognize you, sir.
Butler's very calm. And now it's payback time. The booze again on the desk. One of the many objections that Joe Breen raised about the submitted script was the ample use of alcohol in so many scenes. Notice how Kirk is having his coffee with a whiskey set up on his desk.
I thought we ought to have a little talk. We'll kick off first, your team or mine. You look terrible, Sam. Have a drink.
Have a drink.
Thanks.
Van kicks the drawer shut on Kirk's hand. Shades of Ralph Meeker doing the same thing to Coroner Percy Helton in Kiss Me Deadly, or Robert Mitchum's extra knuckles in The Friends of Eddie Coyle. What did Mitchum say about the desk drawer? Hurts like a bastard. And they're going to have a pair of drinks and get down to cases. Despite his zealousness of enforcing the production code, Joe Breen did try to protect the studios from state and local censors. Even with all the scrutiny over the film's content, Pennsylvania forced deletion of the close-up of Janice Wilton as Martha welding the cane and a medium view of Wilson striking Judith Anderson.
I wasn't going to shoot.
And there was another deletion by the state of Massachusetts of a line that was deemed suggestive. So these films would go out, and then the states would arbitrarily delete scenes of them before they could be shown in theaters.
Much more detailed picture on Sam Masterson. I didn't know you cared. You know it now. Now I'll let Martha give it to you.
Give him what, Sam?
The facts concerning a guy called Sam Masterson and his attitudes towards life and love. Walter's got their own ideas.
Sam, you're hurt.
Kirk confesses, I like the way Heflin treats Douglas as if he's handicapped or such a diminished, pitiful personages that revenge is now of little consequence. I think the Sam Masterson character fully understands that it's Martha who is either directly or indirectly causing what's happened to him.
I thought it might scare you into not coming back.
Heflin's in the middle of a messy marriage by no doing of his own, and he's mystified now when Douglas brings up blackmail.
I said blackmail. Now what is the price? Remember, you're dealing with two...
Martha Ivers premiered in New York City during the week of July 25th, 1946, and was released on 13 September. The reviews were favorable, but they were mixed. The New York Times' Bosley Crowther had particular praise for Stanwyck, writing that she is twice the hard-boiled, lustful vixen that she played in Double Indemnity. He also pointed out that Lizabeth Scott's part was poorly written and her character was underdeveloped. One of the few times I've ever agreed with Bosley Crowther about anything. Other reviews were more generous. The Hollywood Reporter tabbed the picture as an intelligent example of screen storytelling at its best. Variety chimed in with a powerfully dramatic and suspenseful production, with the film being an achievement for all concerned with its production. The adult content of the picture turned off a lot of out-of-town critics. Time magazine savaged the film, saying it was unpleasant and even repugnant. Kirk Douglas was noticed favorably as well, although Variety oddly thought he might get typecasted playing the weakling Walter. In light of Kirk's career, that off-base assessment sounds pretty funny.
And a stupid one. Yesterday afternoon, he told me he...
As Babs ministers to Kirk, I'll always remember filming Kirk's introduction to The Strange Love of Martha Ivers in 2010 at his Bryna production company office in Beverly Hills. When we finished filming, I said to Kirk, "You've played a lot of bastards in your career, but few were better than Chuck Tatum in Ace in the Hole." Kirk grinned at me and said, "Yes, Billy Wilder. Wasn't that a great movie? Billy told me to give that character, give it both knees to the groin, and so I did."
I want to hear you say it.
It's up to him.
No, it's up to you. I know you, Martha. You are my life's work.
He's right. It is up to
I've
her.
studied you all these years. A little girl in a cage waiting for someone to let her out.
The boss is the boss, and in this situation, that's Martha.
You know what's on my mind, Martha? About Sam, I mean.
I think I do. And that's where it will stay on your mind. Unless, of course, I tell you differently.
What did O'Neill say? Do you think we'll make trouble?
No, I had him figured out right. He's still just a scared little kid. Coffee, please, Black. No, Martha's the one I can't dope out.
Martha?
Mrs. O'Neill. The three of us grew up together. I told you about it, remember? Thanks.
What's she like now?
Now it's Liz's turn to get jealous, and no wonder Wallace wanted those close-ups. She's just gorgeous. It's fascinating how Rossen uses the Sam Masterson character as an emotional ping-pong ball to set off actions and reactions by the other three principals of his story. By 1946, Wallace was building quite a stable of acting talent that he had signed up. Lizabeth Scott, Kirk Douglas, Burt Lancaster, Wendell Corey, my late friend Mickey Knox, who would be blacklisted.
Well, what do we do until then? I know. Why don't we find out what happened to your people?
Oh, it'll be simple. Now I know I left town September 27th, 1928.
September 27, 1928. What else happened significant on that date? The discovery of penicillin was announced, and the New York Yankees clinched their 6th American League pennant. And Sam Masterson left Iverstown.
Down to the newspaper morgue.
The morgue?
Yeah, I think I can find out about my people down there. Afterwards, take you shopping.
Olin Howland, one of my favorite character actors. Always remembered him in the sci-fi film Them. He played a goofy drunk in an alcoholic ward who saw the giant ants. "Make me a sergeant and charge the booze." He had that unusual voice.
It's my favorite case. The picture of the guy.
Doesn't look like very much, does it?
Yeah, kind of a scared little rabbit. I watched him all through the trial. Never had a chance. O'Neill really did a job on him.
Is that Walter O'Neill?
Yep, same guy. It was kind of dramatic, though.
And all of this is based on the assumption that Van Heflin witnessed what happened to Judith Anderson. And the lesson is assumptions are always potentially dangerous, I guess. I remember an instructor long ago teaching some course I was in who wrote "assume" on the blackboard and then circled 3 parts of the word: ass, you, and me.
Yes?
Babs gazing out at her empire.
3 o'clock on the nose.
On the nose. Come in, Sam.
These two are just so good together.
Big executives always keep people waiting. Did you know that?
Good executives don't.
I bet you're good.
I am. It catches it, doesn't it? The feeling of a factory.
When your aunt owned this place, I couldn't get past the gate. Now I'm a guest. Or am I?
I invited you here.
Martha, did your aunt leave you everything?
Heflin starts rolling that coin again. Stanwyck didn't put up with too much of this business of scene stealing from fellow actors. According to an early biographer, Stanwyck said, "Van, that's a wonderful piece of business, but if you do that during my important lines, I have a piece of business that will draw attention away from yours. Anytime you start rolling that coin while I'm talking, I'll be fixing my garter. So be sure you don't do that when I have important lines to speak." This shot was the only time Heflin did his coin-rolling number with Stanwyck in the film.
A gimmick is an angle that works for you to keep you from working too hard for yourself.
Heflin's got a gimmick he thinks is better than his coin.
Specifically? Half.
Half of what?
You tell me.
All right, Sam. Come here. My father used to work here as a mill hand.
And now Stanwyck presents her empire, and this was a direct thrust by Robert Rossen about capitalism and power. I did it all by myself, and it's all mine.
It had 3,000 workers then. It's got 30,000 now. Ran as far as that gate. Now it goes
The only thing that's missing is a Donald Trump logo on the smokestack.
Without Walter, without his father. All by myself.
Half of this should make quite a score.
Half would make you my partner.
That's what I had in mind.
You went out of here a dirty little
I
kid
like the
once
way
before
she
that could
moves her
happen
body in this.
I don't have to give you anything if
She
I don't
leans
want
back when she's unhappy, and then she leans in when she agrees. The leaning in, of course, is a resounding yes, because she does want Heflin, and he knows it.
Come in here, quick!
Meanwhile, back at the hotel,
Yes, Sam?
Make a wish.
notice that you can't see Scott's belly button with the tied-up shirt. That was forbidden even as late as Barbara Eden playing in the television sitcom I Dream of Jeannie in 1965. For some reason, showing a woman's belly button was deemed prurient.
I know so. And that's an asset for a guy in my business.
Tony Marichek asset.
Tony Marichek, good kid. You stick around, Tony Marichek.
Now I've got all the luck. I'm funny that way. I say what's on my mind.
You walk down the street and a girl asks you for a cigarette.
And the match and the time.
Again,
Life is funny.
this pitching woo byplay between Heflin and Scott simply doesn't raise the temperature like some of Van's scene with Stanwyck.
And even if it's over, quick.
Look, what you don't know, don't talk about.
I bought a new outfit. I want to show you.
Well, let's take a look at it.
$8.95. How do you like it?
With you in it?
And speaking of Babs, busted.
Tony.
Yes, Sam?
I heard you talking.
Well, even a crummy hotel like this has a switchboard.
I have special privileges in this hotel, Sam. I own it.
It's Miss O'Neill, Tony.
Hello. So this is the girl.
Lizabeth Scott said that Stanwyck did not speak to her in any meaningful way during the picture. It wasn't hard to figure. Scott was 23 and Stanwyck was 38. According to Lewis Milestone's biographer Harlow Robinson, Stanwyck hesitated to take the Martha Ivers role because she was worried about being upstaged by the younger actress. Milestone promised not to allow that to happen, and she agreed to sign on for the picture. Based on how Rossen's script devalued Scott's character and how this scene was the only one the two women have together in the film, and of course Stanwyck's own considerable acting chops, she really had no need to worry about being upstaged by Lizabeth Scott. A very smart outfit with the head cover for Barbara Stanwyck that was designed by the renowned fashion designer at Paramount, Edith Head.
Let's get out of here.
I've never been in a hotel room like this before.
I've been in too many.
Just the way you read about it in books. Window shade, scotch on the dresser. Let's stay here, Sam.
The notion of a night in a cheap hotel room with Van, some Chinese takeout, and a bottle of whiskey on the dresser is a definite turn-on for Stanwyck.
Come on, let's go.
What's your Tony Marichek really like?
As Babs and Van size each other up on the dance floor, Hal Wallace certainly could spot and sign up talented actors. But his ability to develop their talent into stardom is subject to question. After Martha Ivers, Wallace loaned Kirk Douglas to RKO for Out of the Pass, followed by another Wallace-produced noir, I Walk Alone, also including Burt Lancaster and Lizabeth Scott in the cast. Wallace tried to sign Kirk to a 7-year term contract, and when Douglas refused to obligate himself, Wallace dropped him. He then appeared in 3 more pictures as an independent, including A Letter to 3 Wives, but didn't become a star until he turned down MGM's The Great Sinner for an independent picture produced by a relatively unknown Stanley Kramer. Turning down a guaranteed $50,000 for $15,000 in deferred money to appear in 1949's Champion really excited Kirk's agent in the wrong way. Didn't make Kirk a lot of money, but it made him an above-the-title movie star. And Hal Wallis had nothing to do with it. Likewise, Burt Lancaster became an immediate star when Mark Hellinger borrowed him from Wallace for The Killers in 1946. Wallace's biography titled Star Maker might have been more appropriately titled Star Finder, or perhaps more sarcastically, Loan Shark. He didn't do anything either with Christine Miller, who he had under contract, who was beautiful and a fine actress, but Wallace preferred to concentrate on Lizabeth Scott. Wendell Corey forged a credible career as a character actor after leaving Wallace's stable. Time for some payback delivered to John Kellogg. And notice Barbara stands there enjoying the show. The appreciative bartender here is Bob Perry, who was also a restaurateur in New York and Los Angeles.
Thought I told you to wait outside.
I wanted to see.
I wanted to see. She sounds like an eager little kid, definitely turned on by the violence.
This the spot?
Yes.
This shot was done in the studio with the back-projected screen of Hollywood at night, not Iverstown.
What?
She was turned into a pillar of salt.
And there's a biblical reference that will crop up again.
You know your Bible.
You would too if you spent as much time as I did in hotel rooms.
I'll take it up. Come on, let's get out of here. I love to watch the city from this spot.
Up here doesn't even look real, does it?
It's real, very real. Owning it gives you a sense of power.
There you go again, a revelatory comment about her character, if there ever was one. This was Van Heflin's first picture after being away in the Army for 3 years. He was still under contract to MGM as they initially offered him the same salary he had before the war, under the grounds that he hadn't fulfilled his initial contract because he was in the Army. Although Metro ended up backing off this cheapskate move, it served to alienate Heflin from the studio. He eventually left MGM in 1949. As far as Martha Ivers was concerned, he was so eager to get back to work, he told a reporter, "I feel like a kid the night before Christmas. I can't sleep. I'm just so glad to be back." Heflin was actually very nervous about the picture. He had been away a long time. And he gave Barbara Stanwyck credit for helping him, telling Hedda Hopper afterwards, "She was great to me. I was scared to death, couldn't remember my lines, and had no feeling of security. Barbara didn't pull any punches. She let me have it, and that was what I needed." And Heflin also chose the script and the character of Sam Masterson, saying, "When I read Sam, I knew he was for me. Sam is a guy you meet every day. He knows the score. He's painted in a number of colors, and it's the Sams that promise a long life as an actor."
What did you say, Sam?
Nothing. I didn't say anything.
When I found out, it was too late.
And now we're coming to what is known as a big moment in the film.
Another what?
I don't want to talk about it anymore.
No, go ahead, Martha. It'll do you good. Another what?
Where was I?
One thing led to another.
It would have been so different if you hadn't run away. It would have been you instead of Walter. Or if you had stopped me. When I lived at the cane, why didn't you stop me? You knew how much I hated her. Why didn't you stop me?
I wasn't there, Martha.
And then I stood there afterwards.
And it finally comes out. All of the deviousness, the manipulation, all for nothing, because Sam never saw Martha club her aunt down the stairs.
No, Martha. I wasn't there. I left when your aunt came into the hallway.
And she's just handed him the power.
As it was. I never saw what happened. I never knew until tonight about your aunt or that man, the one they hung. The man that you and Walter killed.
So what does she do? Pick up a fire stick and try to hit him with it. This scene with the dissolve at the end implies something more followed after the struggle, the clinch, and now the kiss. As indicated by the fire now out and smoldering.
Tell me. Talk.
Unlike Stanwyck, both Lizabeth Scott and Kirk Douglas said Heflin was very supportive and helpful to them during the production. But Barbara Stanwyck was case-hardened, tough as nails. She had a lot of bad things happen to her. I remember interviewing Robert Wagner, who had a long affair with Stanwyck in the 1950s, that she eventually ended because of their age difference and the potential scandal. RJ told me that Stanwyck had a scar on her chest where Al Jolson burned her with a cigar after she rejected a crude advance from him backstage when she was on the chorus. She survived a horrific marriage to Frank Fay, who was a huge stage act in the 1920s. Fay was the original monologist that was copied by Bob Hope, Jack Benny, Milton Berle, and others. When Stanwyck came to Hollywood in 1928-29, it was because Fay got a movie deal with Warner's. She didn't really want to come, but she did get a contract for a picture. As it turned out, his career foundered and hers took off. Fay became a violent alcoholic who was physically abusive to Barbara. She took it as long as she could. She was in love with him, but the joke around Hollywood became, who had the biggest prick in town? Barbara Stanwyck. She finally divorced Fay after he endangered their adopted son Dion and generally became a maniac. Stanwyck also was a rock-rib Republican. She was shy personally. She hated the Hollywood glitz and phoniness, but could be extremely generous and fanatically loyal to her friends and family. But she was one of those people who, because they made it the hard way, she felt that everybody else could and should travel the same route that she did.
Oh, Sam, please!
And now, as Martha, Stanwyck plays the part of being blackmailed into marrying Kirk by Kirk and his conniving father.
Hi, Martha.
Uh-oh, Liz should not have been looking out the window. Lizabeth Scott's first film, You Came Along, in 1945, is mostly a forgotten comedy drama that was rewritten by Ayn Rand, a friend of Scott's as well as Stanwyck's, and produced by Wallace, of course, and directed by the mercurial John Farrow. Farrow was known for his brusque treatment of actors, and he reduced Scott to tears on several occasions, but it might have just been a dose of tough Hollywood love for the newcomer. It's a very sentimental film with Scott falling in love with the terminally ill war hero pilot played by Robert Cummings. What I liked was that after Bosley Crowther savaged the picture and Scott in his New York Times review, Scott got Crowther on the telephone and gave him a piece of her mind. It was Crowther's habit to write personally insulting critiques about actors and filmmakers, so it was nice to see him get somewhat of a comeuppance. Interestingly, for all of Joe Breen's hand-wringing over the script content of Martha Ivers, he personally contacted Hal Wallace and praised the film after watching the answer print and issuing the MPAA seal of approval for the movie. Wallace sent a wire to Paramount on January 10, 1945, stating that he was elated at Breen's enthusiasm over Martha Ivers. He's proven so right on our past pictures. By past pictures, Wallace was doubtlessly harking back to Casablanca when he was holding sway at Warner Brothers. After watching Casablanca, Breen phoned Wallace and told him that the picture was one of the best Hollywood movies he'd watched in years. So Breen wasn't totally lacking in either taste or acumen.
Well, that's what I came in to tell you about.
When Hal Wallace sent Scott to England on a publicity tour for Martha Ivers, she was a big hit. There hadn't been a movie star visit for a long time due to the war, and both the public and press went wild. A telegram from Paramount's rep to Wallace on June 12, 46 stated, "London press has really taken Lizabeth to heart. Stop. Front page on all evening papers. Stop. Big photographic coverage in dailies. Set for 2 broadcasts and television. Complete schedule arranged. Stop. She really has that thing." While PR communications are no doubt exaggerated, I read some of these English clippings, and there was no doubt that Scott and Ivers scored big with the public and the press in the UK.
I'm sorry I said that, Tony. Look, kid. I'm sore at myself, not at you.
Do you want me to leave?
Do you want to leave?
That's up to you, Sam. I'm here on a rain check.
I'm here in a rain check. Heflin's on-screen sincerity was always convincing.
That's the way we wanted it.
And now?
I'm not sure. I'm just not sure.
Cue the Torn Between Two Lovers soundtrack. But actually, Heflin should have known better at this point.
Hello, Gable Hotel. I want to speak to Sam Masterson.
Put that phone down.
Hello, Sam. This is Walter.
We're now approaching the climax of the film as Walter summons Sam for a showdown. Along with John Wayne, Ward Bond, Walt Disney, Hedda Hopper, Robert Montgomery, King Vidor, and others, Barbara Stanwyck was also a member of the Motion Picture Alliance for the Preservation of American Ideals. The alliance was formed in 1944 for the stated rationale of defending the film industry in the country from infiltration of communist and fascist ideas and philosophy. Although Stanwyck certainly wasn't a shrill right-winger who went looking for communists under various Hollywood beds like Hopper and Bond and Walter Brennan, she and her husband, Robert Taylor, were both staunch conservatives, with Stanwyck supporting the UAC investigations into Hollywood. Both of them detested Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal programs. Stanwyck's biographer, Victoria Wilson, chronicled how Stanwyck didn't voluntarily join the Screen Actors Guild. She had been a member of Actors' Equity because of her stage work in New York, but she didn't approve of organized labor or unions. When SAG and Actors' Equity became affiliated in 1934, Stanwyck received a letter stating she would be suspended if she didn't join the guild. Similar letters were sent to Elizabeth Allen, Rosalind Russell, and Claire Trevor. Stanwyck didn't respond, and then the guild finally sent her name to Actors' Equity requesting that she be suspended. Finally seeing the light, Stanwyck joined SAG and was elected a senior member of the guild.
It was a good kind of trouble. And now?
Now what?
Sam, I saw her. You're going to get hurt. Leave her, Sam. Leave this town. Even without me, but leave.
I can't. At least not just yet.
Van's got unfinished business, and Liz and Van part company, or do they? Hal Wallace controlled everything about Lizabeth Scott's publicity and career while he had her under contract. He either approved or disapproved of every photograph, every hairstyle, every promotional opportunity, every magazine layout, every advertisement, every detail. Being the lover of a producer like Wallace was doubtlessly a difficult proposition for Scott. Kirk Douglas said working with Scott in I Walk Alone was problematic. Very often she'd be in his office for a long time and emerge teary-eyed and be difficult to work with for the rest of the day. Wallace nitpicked over everything having to do with Miss Scott. A typical instance was a Wallace memo to Al Wilkie, a publicity underling, about a Scott photo layout in August 1945, saying, "I don't like the layout in photoplay. I don't think the pictures are particularly good, and I certainly don't like her being used as a commercial model for $3.98 dresses with direct advertising for department stores." Wallace wanted everything to do with Lizabeth Scott to be high class, but it was his way or the highway. In a way, he was a lot like Martha Ivers as far as being a controlling personage.
Or I'll take a mental test. Any question like,
And here's where Kirk decides to give Van the lowdown on his wife with all of the gory details. Van Heflin's career continued to thrive after he left MGM in 1949. Nearly everyone associates Heflin with Shane, one of the all-time great westerns, and rightfully so. However, one of his finest performances, arguably the best to me, was in The Prowler in 1951. One of the most subversive films ever to come out of Hollywood. It was really a perverse take on the American dream. Heflin plays a psychotic cop who knocks off Evelyn Keyes' husband, marries her to buy a cheap truck stop hotel, and then finds out right after the marriage she's pregnant. I remember watching The Prowler with actress Marcia Hunt, who knew and admired Heflin tremendously. They had co-starred in MGM's Kid Glove Killer in 1942. When the theater lights came up, Marcia turned to me and said, "I never knew Van could play that type of character." Heflin was quoted as remarking about his Prowler turn, playing a character named Webb Garwood. "He's someone I could have possibly become," indicating that perhaps Van Heflin did possess some interior dark alleyways.
The one and only man who shares with me the only claim I have on it.
Boy, oh boy, does Kirk know his wife. And this finale here is really where Kirk Douglas showed everyone that he definitely had the acting chops in front of the camera to make it big in Hollywood.
That's a lie. Your old man forced her. How long you expect her to go on paying off?
Forever.
Whatever happens to you, you've got coming.
What can happen, Sam? Shall I tell you? She'll try to get you to kill me. Like she got me to send an innocent man to the gallows.
I told you the way it was. It was his father's idea. He made...
But did she tell you how she stood up in the police station? How she looked at the man?
And as Kirk said, this is where, when you play a weak character, you concentrate on the weak character's strong moment. And this is definitely his strong moment.
That even stuck in the throat of my father. My poor, dear, departed, greedy father. But he went right on. And so did I.
He's lying. You believe me, don't you,
You
Sam?
believe her, Sam? Martha, at least tell the truth now. Tell how much you were afraid of an unsolved murder. Tell what a threat it was to the power and the riches that you'd learned to love so much and that I'd learned to love too. Tell why I became district attorney. Tell why you made me hang that man. Tell the truth.
I told the truth. They were like leeches, both of them. They wanted everything.
All I ever wanted was
everything
you.
you
I'm
are,
nothing.
everything you have,
You
I
gave
gave
me
you.
nothing.
Then let go!
You're insane. You're out of your mind.
Notice how Heflin listens while Douglas is talking. He just doesn't wait to say his line. He's into the scene.
It'll have to be you or me.
And I love how he grabs the coat and Heflin glances at his hand as if it was no account whatsoever. And if you previously came to the conclusion that Martha and Walter deserve one another, all of this and what follows makes you realize that they really don't. Walter is pathetic, but Martha is, bottom line, evil.
Inside of me, I'm sick. Martha, help me. Please.
Sam, you believe me, don't you?
Same stairway. Babs wants a rerun of Judith Anderson. But where's the club?
Everybody knows what a heavy drinker he was. Oh, Sam, it can be so easy.
Boy, she's really pitching. What I really like here is how Milestone shows Heflin saving Kirk instead of killing him by the changing expression on Stanwyck's face. A really neat pictorial invention that only an actress as accomplished as Barbara Stanwyck could pull off convincingly. Watch.
You loved me.
I thought I did.
For Martha, a love and obedience are one of the same. She's actually become her aunt, worse than her aunt, actually.
I dreamed about you coming back.
Your whole life has been a dream.
I thought you'd be the Sam I knew as a child.
Martha, you're sick.
I could run to you when I was in trouble.
In your mind, I mean, that's where you're sick.
And you'd help me.
So sick that you don't even know the difference between right and wrong anymore.
You've killed. It says so in your record.
I've never murdered.
That is a great line. There is a world of difference between killing and murder.
Are you all right now? All right. You fell down the stairs. I remember. You carried me in here. Yeah. You had your chance, Sam.
It is film noir. When all else fails, pull a gun.
Thin line. The one between life and death.
You said I didn't know the difference between right and wrong. What's right for Walter and myself? For us to tell the truth?
I think so, yes.
And hang for it?
You wouldn't hang for it. Not if you confessed. You'd do time, sure.
Sure, I'll rot in prison for the rest of my life. And for what? What am I guilty of?
Murder.
What were their lives compared to mine? What was she?
Here's Rossen's final thrust against those who run the system. The rich and powerful have this sense of entitlement, that their lives would mean just as much as anyone else's would never occur to someone like her.
Neither one of them had any right to live.
Martha Ivers would make a great politician, come to think of it.
Bye, Martha.
Sam. Sam's going away. Did you hear what I said, Walter?
Yes, I heard you.
We can't let him go, can we?
Martha's waiting for your answer, Walter.
We'd always be afraid of him. We couldn't live that way. We'd be fools to let him go knowing so much about us.
May have a little trouble squaring this one.
You broke into the house, you demanded money, you tried to attack me, and I shot you in self-defense. I have a right to kill in self-defense.
Martha's legacy. I have the right to do whatever I want, including kill.
Isn't that what the law says, Walter?
It'll hold up, Walter. A man with a police record. It's a perfect case.
What she actually has to do is pull the trigger. And when it comes down to it, Walter isn't as morally bankrupt as his wife.
I feel sorry for you. Both of you.
I would have waited to get out of the range of the gun before I said that. Barbara Stanwyck was nominated 4 times for the Academy Award as Best Actress for Stella Dallas, Ball of Fire, Double Indemnity, and Sorry Wrong Number, which was made 2 years later, also with Hal Wallis producing. She never won a competitive Oscar, but was awarded an honorary Oscar in 1982. I think she should have been nominated for Martha Ivers. Stanwyck remains one of the screen's greatest actresses, and almost all of her performances hold up magnificently. It's notable that when Stanwyck received her 1982 award, she went out of her way to thank the people behind the camera, including the stunt men and women whom she said taught me so much. Again, for Barbara Stanwyck, it was never about the glitz or the stardom. It was about doing meaningful work as an actress.
How hard it is for them to get it.
For me, it's hard to believe that Kirk Douglas has finally left the stage, dying last year in 2020 at the incredible age of 103. I'll always remember the day I spent with him. Before we started rolling the cameras on his introduction, I asked Kirk if he wanted me to ask him any questions. He said, "Nope, I know what I want to say. They used to call me One Take Douglas. You be the judge." After Kirk said what he had to say about Martha Ivers faultlessly at age 93 and after a stroke, I cut the camera. Kirk looked at me and grinned and said, "What do you think? Pretty fucking good, aren't I?" We both laughed. Kirk was something else. He actually sent me a thank you letter that stated, "Remember that one take is better than many takes. You did a good job." They don't make them like Kirk Douglas anymore. This business with both of their hands holding the gun, some claim that Stanwyck came up with this, but it was in the script. This finale was exactly in step with what Joe Breen at the censor's office called compensating moral values. Walter and Martha took the life of an innocent man, so they had to die in the end.
No, Martha Smith.
Walter ends the tragedy. And it is time, past time, to get out of town. And Lizabeth is still waiting. When I sat with Lizabeth Scott at the Academy, she seemed somewhat uncomfortable. I mentioned what a thrill it was to finally meet her personally and how much people there appreciated her being there. When I asked her how she felt about all this, Scott responded that she was quite nervous about her appearance. I reached over and gently squeezed her hand and said, "Don't be, you're among friends." She gave me that smile and said, "Thanks, Alan." And I'll always have that memory as well.
Sam's wife.
Not Lot's wife, Sam's wife.
Sam's wife.
And what a nice fade out to a great picture. This has been Alan K. Rohde. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you at the movies.